Now we come to structural functionalism, whose main theorist is Talcott Parsons, an American sociologist. According to Parsons, societies are best understood as social systems consisting of complementary parts, such as social roles, institutions, and organizations. The various parts form a social structure or normative framework, which define the expectations and obligations of the people living within society. Parsons was influenced by both Durkheim and Weber because he believed in looking at society as a whole through the social structure, but also without ignoring social action. Parsons assumed that social systems have certain needs. The social structures such as economic, legal, educational institutions, and others met these needs, and that's why they existed. Using the structural functionalist perspective, he further divided the concept of society into three parts. The first, personality systems, the second, social systems, and the third, cultural systems. When these parts came together to form a whole, they became the social structure. So the social structure also acts as a normative framework. The cultural system played the most important part because it influences the way things actually get done, or the mode of production, to quote Marx. So when Parsons talked about social institutions, what he meant was not anything like banks, schools, or organizations, but rather generalized norms and practices, more of an abstract sense. So social institutions, as we mentioned just now, are arranged in groups according to their function, and these groups are called subsystems. So some systems under which subsystems lie, these are the major systems, include the biological system, which consists of physical action, the personality system, which consists of human motivation, the social system, which consists of patterns of activity, and the cultural system, which consists of a consensus on values. So under the third one, the social system, there are also several subsystems, which are the economic system, political system, societal community, the socialization system, and further down this leads to more subsystems, and even more and more. So Parsons also believed in systems' abilities to self-regulate. So this is called the science of systems when we study how they self-regulate, and the word used here is cybernetics. It's something like artificial intelligence. Parsons used this term, cybernetics, to explain the social system. And each system is fed by a different type of input. The cultural system and the social system is fed by information as an input, while the personality system and the biological system is fed by energy as an input. A change in any one of the systems mentioned before will lead to a chain reaction in another system. The systems will always adjust themselves, like a push and pull effect, to find a balancing point, which we call equilibrium. So society will always maintain its equilibrium, although generally the systems might move around a little bit. As social systems become more differentiated, structures also become more specialized. So it's like Durkheim's concern with the division of labor, where there will be more specialization in organic solidarity. And therefore the social system also changes, but it will still find its own equilibrium later on. So, although he was not an interpretivist, Parsons was still influenced to some extent by Weber's concept of social action. So Parsons did believe we need to examine social action from social actors' point of view, rather than just looking at physical or biological behaviors. So that was how Parsons explained the origins of social norms and values. First of all, people will always act in ways that will maximize their gratification. When people obtain gratification, they will repeat that behavior, and hence expectations of outcomes emerge. So very much like socialization, and in a way like meets I and me, when we do something that gives us positive results, we tend to repeat that action. So people get accustomed to doing things in a similar way, so over time, these expectations become entrenched in norms and values. A few definitions of key terms here. Actors or social actors are people who, in this case, individuals that we study, who make choices about what goals or ends to pursue. Talking about ends, we also have means, and means here are defined as the resources available to achieve these goals. Status roles, on the other hand, refers to roles where a role is a cluster of normative expectations. So when you talk about a person's social role, it's basically a combination of all the expectations they have to perform that society heaps upon them. So that's where we come to Parsons' famous AGIL, which is basically a concept that consists of 4 functional imperatives or 4 goals that any social institution needs to perform in order to survive and to justify its existence. So the first A refers to adaptation, where a system must cope with external situational exigencies. So when there's any shocks to the system or any emergency, the system must be able to adapt to its environment, to its needs. For example, when humans travel around the world to new lands and new regions, perhaps they find that some lands are not so fertile for farming. So what can you do about it? Build some irrigation systems, look for fertilizer, do something about it. So that's adaptation. And then goal attainment, which is what G stands for. A system must define and achieve its primary goals. If we look at the origins of agrarian societies, to continue with the example, these agrarian states in the past would have to define its roles, which is mainly to perform agricultural roles, and therefore everything including administration and other social institutions were all built on the basis of making sure that the lands were fertile, and the management of these lands occurred through a bureaucratic structure. So like in ancient China. And the third imperative here is integration, which is what I refers to. A system must furnish, maintain, and renew both the motivation of individuals and the cultural patterns that create and sustain the motivation. So usually, societies tend to have a cultural system, for example, the celebration of festivals or events that pass down these norms and values to integrate people into society so that they share the same norms and values. And last of all is latency or pattern maintenance, whereby a system must furnish, maintain, and renew both the motivation of individuals and the cultural patterns that create and sustain the motivation. It's more of a stress release kind of relaxation, whereby festivals again come into the picture, like you have water festivals in some countries, and everybody gets to celebrate regardless of their social status. So that increases the social bonds between people. So in his analysis, Parsons believed that there were levels of social analysis. The lowest level of the social action system is the physical and organic environment. This involves the anatomy and physiology of the human body. So to analyze this, we look at very basic bodily actions. While the highest level has a metaphysical flavor. By this, Parsons mean that the universal tendency for societies to symbolically address uncertainties, concerns, and tragedies of human existence. So we can see this in works of philosophy, art, humanities, and other types of classics. Quite similar to the concept of highbrow versus lowbrow culture, where highbrow tends to be associated with things further away from immediate physical needs, and what they consider lowbrow tends to be something more direct. So Parsons believed that the Hobbesian problem, if we recall Thomas Hobbes, he came up with the idea that human life is nasty, short, and brutish. In other words, a very social conflict-based approach. So Parsons believed that this Hobbesian problem of order had not been sufficiently answered. That is why he turned to structural functionalism to be able to analyze the reasons why systems work or don't work. So he had the following assumptions in structural functionalism, where systems have the property of order and interdependence of parts. very much like mechanical solidarity in simple societies by Durkheim. Systems tend towards self-maintaining order or equilibrium, as mentioned a while ago. The system may be static or involved in an ordered process of change. So there is a social order to social change. The nature of one part of the system has an impact on the form that the other parts can take. Systems maintain boundaries with their environments. Allocation and integration are two fundamental processes necessary for a given state of equilibrium of a system. And systems tend towards self-maintenance, involving the maintenance of boundaries and of the relationships of parts to the whole, control of environmental variations, and control of tendencies to change the system from within. That's where the cybernetics part of the analysis comes into the picture, just like artificial intelligence. Parsons defined the social system as consisting in a plurality of actors interacting with each other in a situation which has at least a physical or environmental aspect. So he began at the micro level with the interaction between the ego, or the I, like the I and the me, and the alter ego, which is defined as the most elementary form of the social system, the I and the generalized other. He argued that features of this interaction system are present in the more complex forms taken by the social system. We'll see many parallels among different theories. So Parsons' definition sought to define a social system in terms of many of the key concepts in his work. For example, actors, interaction, environment, optimization of gratification, and culture. Parsons did not look at interaction as the basic unit of analysis, but look instead at the status-role complex. So going back to the term status role, society's expectations of what we should do. So this is neither an aspect of the individual actor, nor an aspect of interaction, but a structural component of the social system. Status here means the structural position within the social system. And when the individual occupies this status, they are performing a role, which is what the actor does in such a position. Parsons was also interested in analyzing the structural components of the social system. He was interested in large-scale components of the social system, like collectivities, norms, and values. So Parsons was not only a structuralist, that means he believed in the importance of the social structure, but also a functionalist, and that's why he outlined the AGIL, the functional imperatives that allow social institutions to perform their functions. He did not, however, ignore the relation between social actors and social structures. So that's why we say he did not ignore social action entirely. Parsons called the integration of value patterns and need dispositions the fundamental dynamic theorem of sociology. He was thus interested in the ways in which the norms and values of a system are transferred to the social actors within the system. In a successful socialization process, these norms and values are internalized by the individuals. But it's quite a top-down approach, of course. Rather than serving their own needs, the actors are serving the interests of the system as a whole. So, like with any other theorist, Parsons also had his own critics. He was heavily criticized for his static orientation and assumption of equilibrium. And they also said that his theory did not explain why social change occurred. And Merton criticized him for being overly comprehensive.